Hello, everyone. I'm Nish, a Rotary Peace Fellow from Nepal. And today I'm going to share you my story of building creative people power. Born and raised in Nepal, I witnessed injustice from a very young age. Through caste system, class system, gender disparity, and unequal power distribution between power holders and duty bearers. To resolve this injustice, Maoists had declared civil war in Nepal in 1996 and was using terror and violence. My father himself was tortured and jailed by the government, whereas my father-in-law, when treating wounded Maoists, was interrogated by military. And even today, it is so difficult for me and my partner to talk about those incidents of our childhood. And we think, if it is so difficult for us, what kind of difficulties that kids have to go through whose family were killed during that time? Also, for me, Maoist conflict was contradictory. In search of positive peace, which is justice, equity, transformation, they had jeopardized what Nepal already had, a negative peace, which is absence of violence. And while growing up, I used to always ask to myself, can the use of violence by oppressed people lead to justice for them? Or does it simply reproduce new form of injustices? Good thing is that in 2006, civil war ended, and Maoists were in charge of government in no time. But the deeper question remained, did justice actually arrive to the people who was oppressed by the system? To find this answer, after my high school, I traveled to several villages of Nepal, stayed with the communities, and tried to understand what did they face during the Maoist conflict period and in post-conflict era in Nepal. I witnessed that even after several years of the ending of civil war, people were living in more or less similar conditions. Nothing had changed in their lives. There was immense discrimination, poverty, and oppression in the grassroots of Nepal. And also the bits and pieces of conflicts were still remaining. Lots of smaller groups had weapons from the civil war period. And most importantly, the mindset of political parties hadn't changed. Political parties still believed that they could win power and maybe the hearts and minds of people through violence and force. Therefore, they were using violent methods to demand change, demand right, which in contrary was creating more injustice, keeping more people at risk, making more families apart. And again, those living at the margins were the ones who suffered the most. And as someone who was affected by violent conflict myself, I was, of course, a big proponent of nonviolence. I started a nonviolent movement called Anti-Banda campaign, which is basically a general strike, countering the general strike. I was basically protesting the violent way of protest, and I was urging political parties to use nonviolent methods. The more I started campaigning, the more I was fascinated by the concept of nonviolence and started learning more about it. One thing that struck to me that whenever there is an injustice, people organize, whether through violent or non-violent way. They organize to counter injustice. The only question is, do they have non-violent or violent mindset? Non-violent or violent leadership or structure? Doing more research, I noticed that though political movements were using violent methods, a lot of social movements in the grassroots were still using non-violent tactics. They were resisting injustice practices, but in a peaceful manner. So this made me interested to learn why don't we hear about these movements? Why nobody talks about these peaceful movements that they have been existing in local level for years and years? Why their pain and struggles has been invisible? why these movements were fragmented, even though their demands were similar to the violent movements. And then I realized that there was a fundamental problem in nonviolent resistance and nonviolent movements. I started doing more and more research, and I found out that there were two major gaps in grassroots movements of Nepal, social movements of Nepal. Often further research can be generalized in many of the other contexts around the world. The first gap was strategic gap. These movements have had high energy and commitment, but their leaders lack a clear plan for sustained impact over time. Their leaders were good at engaging people quickly, but faced a significant challenge in driving change. They responded to events after the event happened, rather than planning ahead to shape outcomes. Movements with similar goals and constituencies were acting separately without strong collaboration or alignment. And they were not able to expand their movement to create a broader systemic impact in their community. And the second gap that I noticed was the creative gap. These movements were still using same old tactics used in 20th century, but like new media has already come, technology has evolved. They lacked the innovative approach to stand out. They were also struggling to communicate compelling narrative that inspired people to join their movement. They didn't fully use social media or online tools to amplify and impact their movement. They failed to resonate with people outside their core supporters. And they were having trouble expanding visibility and attracting wider people's attention. So I began searching for something that I could bridge this gap. And then I found Artivism. Artivism is a unique practice of combining strategy and creativity. Artivism is not only about art, it is not only about activism, it's a fusion of both strategy and creativity, the connection between head and heart, between plan and emotion. In 2020, together with my partner, who is actually sitting in the third row in the right-hand side there, I co-founded an organization called Freedom Studio, which basically works to expand freedom and justice movement by providing strategic and creative supports to the social movements. We believe that emancipation of marginalized and exploited community is possible through nonviolent creative mobilization. Since then, we have worked with several social movements in Nepal and around the world using Artivism as a tool for social change. And over the last 6 years, we have noticed that Artivism works. It works to build people power, emotions, and connection. It makes movement visible. Communities all around the world have long raised their voice against injustices, discrimination, yet their voices are often not heard and are confined with their own communities. Art helps amplify this lived experience through storytelling, reaching broader audience, and evoking emotional engagement among their supporters. Through songs, visuals, and stories, it can spark the feeling of humor, anger, or empathy. As Artivism uses images, stories, and symbols, people across different literacy level and languages can engage, where technical language or policy language fails to do that. Artivism also helps building feeling that are apart from the shared communities. And most importantly, Artivism is about imagining change. Not only pointing out what's wrong, but asking how can be things done differently. This is really important because people are more likely to take action when they can actually picture a better future. This is an example of a local Artivism campaign that I, along with my team, did in Nepal to address littering on trekking trails in Nepal. As a major destination for mountain climbers, many trails are increasingly polluted with waste left behind by tourists. A team of 33 young people from Freedom Studio undertook a week-long trek to Mardi Himal, one of the mountains in Nepal, collecting plastic waste, which we later transformed into a trashman costume that I wore while walking back from the base camp to the city. It's a part of our public awareness raising. The second example is a use of theater of oppressed, an Artivism tool that Freedom Studio promotes. Through this approach, we encourage audience of a play, of a drama, to become a spectator, actively participating in the performance, to imagine and rehearse alternative future. This method transforms passive viewers into engaged participants, creating a space to critically reflect on operation and explore possibilities for change. In August 2024, I came to Duke as a Rotary Peace Fellow with two major questions. How does development actually work? And what role does creativity play in it? At Duke, I learned that development is political, not just technical. It's about power, who decides and who benefits. It's non-linear and contested every time, and is largely shaped by narratives and institutions. Also, I began to see that creativity is also at the center of development, not only at movement building. Because creativity plays a vital role in shaping narratives, mobilizing people, challenging power, and imagining alternatives. Today, we are facing rising inequality, polarization, and injustice across the world, including here in the United States. To resolve this, as a peace builder, as a policymaker, as an activist, is not alone enough. We need new ways to connect, new ways to mobilize, new ways to imagine change. So I want to leave you with this. I believe that everyone in this room is an artist. Maybe you write, maybe you sing, maybe you design dance or film, maybe you just tell a story. Your creativity is not separate from change. It's a tool for change. So don't just consume art, create it. Whenever you witness injustice, express it. And if something moves you, let it move you into the action. Because real change happens when strategy meets creativity. Thank you very much.